Makonnen Sankofa on racism. Makonnen Sankofa is the author of the best-selling book, The Rise of Rastafari, Resistance, Redemption, and Repatriation, and also the author of the book, Life in Gambia, all of which I've left a link in the description part of this interview for viewers who would love to get a copy from Amazon. There is much to know about Makonnen Sankofa, ranging from him being a journalist to an entrepreneur, educator, public speaker, community activist, etc. But you'll get to know him better as we proceed in the interview. Welcome on the show, Makonnen.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's always nice to speak to you. It's a pleasure being on the show, and I look forward to sharing my information to your listeners.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. Makonnen, one of the key flags that you raised in your book, The Rise of Rastafari, is racism. And that was evidence where you wrote about the migration of the West Indians to England and how they were being maltreated, subjected to police brutality and public attack from racist groups such as the Teddy Boys and the National Front, NF. Could you tell us a bit about this?
Yeah, so let's start with the mass migration now. After World War II happened, England was in a very bad state, and the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, she invited people from the Caribbean to come to England to help rebuild up England following the destruction that was caused by the war. Yeah, so England needed to rebuild their labor force because a lot of people died in World War II. Is one of the most bloodiest war that's most lives have been lost. So there was a shortage of the labor force in England. So the invitation was then sent by Queen Elizabeth to those in the Caribbean and other parts of the Commonwealth to come to England. Yeah, and those people answered the call. Those people in the Caribbean, many of them decided, for so-called what they thought was greener pastures, that they would, go to England. And the living conditions of a lot of people in the Caribbean was very difficult, and it was very hard, in a post really slavery period, in the colonial period, and people's lives were hard, and there wasn't a lot of opportunities and stuff, etc. So a lot of people thought, they go to England, and they had the propaganda, the illusion was that, the streets are paved with gold, and that, England, they went there with high aspirations of England. So between 1948, and there was a ship called the Empire Windrush. Now that between 1948 to really about 1970, the mass migration of people from the Caribbean is really known as the Windrush, that the Windrush generation will fall into people that emigrated from the Caribbean islands during that period. Maybe not all of them traveled directly on that specific ship, the Windrush, but some of them traveled on other vessels, but they are known as the Windrush generation. Now, when these people from the Caribbean, they got to England, they realized the reality of England. They realized that the streets weren't paved with gold. The streets are paved a lot of times, but there's grey skies. They're used to the Caribbean where it's not sunny weather and everything. They're used to grey skies, these factory buildings, and sometimes in houses that were built up better in the Caribbean, they saw inferior houses. Some of them in England, this dull, strange looking country, a hostile environment, in terms of they weren't received well by the people. The white people in the society were very racist at the time, and didn't accept the people from the Caribbean because they were racist, and they wanted to keep England white, and you had racist groups like the NF and the Teddy Boys. The NF stands for National Front. The Teddy Boys, they used to beat up black people in the streets for no reason other than them being black. They used to be signs on people's doors. They didn't used to rent rooms, places to black people. There used to be no dogs, no blacks, no Irish, and it was a very, very hard time. It wasn't nothing like what they expected. All of their hope and aspirations, and they come to this country and they were treated so badly by the people in the country just because the color of their skin. And to a lot of people in the Caribbean at that time, for example, they didn't even know. They were just around black people. They didn't even understand, what racism was in that kind of sense, until they come to England and see like, what, someone doesn't like me because of the color of my skin? Like, what kind of craziness is that? And the society, so it was you had a lot of personal racism, but you also had a lot of institutional racism as well. Like, as I said, there was a lot of jobs, but black people were held back from getting, and it still happens to this day, certain positions, higher positions are, and institutional racism in terms of even the police brutality as well. So it was common, whether it wasn't, the racists attacked by these groups like the NF and the Teddy Boys, then you had the police, that would, just see, black people or black person and just, in the street and just pick them up, put them into a police van, beat them up and take them to the station. Or different laws things that they tried to put in place to do random stop and searches on black people and plant and basically put black people in prisons, particularly young black males. That was particularly black males, and especially young black males were often targeted by the police. And sometimes they were strung up on false charges and taken to prison. There's a you can Google it. There's some people called the Oval Four. And that was one of my brother's friend's dad was one of those people from the Oval Four. And, basically he was in a place called the Oval, which is in London. The police framed them, put them to prison, beat them up, got them to, make false confessions because they were beaten up, and they were sentenced to prison. And these are the kind of things that used to happen to, black people on a regular basis in England in those kind of times. So it was very, very difficult to be a black person living in England in in that kind of Windrush period.
Wow. Thank you very much for saying this, because when I actually read the book, I love your explanation of racism, and you're talking about the Teddy Boys and the National Front. It's quite intriguing to me. Now, you also talk about the effect of transatlantic slave trade in your book, Life in Gambia. And you wrote in page 22, and I quote that the transatlantic slave trade was a crime against humanity that until this day has left a traumatic legacy on the descendants of those who were enslaved. I repeat myself again. The transatlantic slave trade was a crime against humanity that unto this day has left a traumatic legacy on the descendant of those who were enslaved. I love this quote, and I would love to have your more detailed opinion on it. How or in what way do you think that the transatlantic slave trade influenced racism?
Because the mentality of racism stayed in the minds of the people. So even though the chains were taken off, the descendants of the enslaved Africans, and for those of us who are descendants of enslaved Africans, of our ancestors, the slavery on the plantation, that kind of thing. But the way that generally the white society at the time looked at black people was still in inferiority, and promoting white supremacy, and there was laws and several things that put in place. So like in the Caribbean, I could even use, even in sport, the captain of the West Indies cricket team had to be a white man, I think up until like the 60s. And the 60s is not a really long time ago, considering. So, and this is after slavery. I'm saying this is going into colonial years now. So, these things, some of these, the reminiscence of it is still existing today. And if you look at in America, for example, laws were put in place after the emancipation, where different laws were put in place to hold back black people from getting the same privileges and the same rights.
Right.
And you had the Jim Crow laws in the United States, and segregation, which segregated white and black people from going to schools, from socializing together, from mixing, going to the same hospitals, from different parts of the restaurants. Black people had to be in the back of the bus, white people at the front. From all restaurants, dedicate different parts, different toilets, different water fountains, all kind of aspects of the society. And because they were still with that kind of mentality, that black people are slaves. and less and not a full human being. I think in United States law, in the Constitution, it was like the 3/5 of a human being are black people. And in transatlantic slave trade, the reason why a lot of the slave masters, the cruelty was done because a lot of people had to like convince themselves, the white slave masters, that black people were subhuman and that things to kind of justify these kind of vicious acts that they did. And then after slavery ended, some of the things that were put in place to kind of, to get people, to get black people in a similar situation was laws that were put in place where black people basically were put in prison and then forced to work in labor, on prison in similar kind of environments that were like slavery, for example. A black person couldn't talk, couldn't shout or raise his voice at a white woman. Yeah, and there's several instances where black black men who, for example, looked at a white woman, for example, could be lynched and these kind of things could happen. You had a black man who just whistled at a white woman, and then he was killed by a mob of white people. Yeah, and I mentioned that because that's a very big popular case. But things like lynchings that happened, to black people, and these is all kind of stems, from the ill treatment from going from slavery, which set up a lot of the framework from racism in how the minds of the oppressive white people think about black people.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was also going to ask you, as someone who has lived in the UK, what was the most thing you hated about the degradation of the blacks by the white? And how would you address the ill perception of superior and inferiority based on skin color?
I think now we're talking about nowadays in this state and age, I think it's the fact of, whereas in my parents' generation or grandparents' generation, it would have been, like literally physical race. It could have been physical, racism, like as in white people or police attacking you in the street or police officers putting you in prison and that kind of stuff, and not being able to like rent certain accommodations and that kind of things. Where I think racism now is more subtle, but I would say in terms of black people are still treated, and we've always been treated in the UK since arriving here, as who you are, what you do, for example. You can be the best in your profession. Like I've been the best in my profession in terms of best salesman in the country. You can be, a top footballer earning X amount of money. You can be a top lawyer, top barrister. No matter whatever you do, you're always treated by the environment, as a second-class citizen. And so, and the bar is always set for. I think a lot of the institutional society, the white society, they're happy to see nowadays. They would be content with seeing a black person in an organisation who's at a low level of organisation. They were happy to see a black person be a cleaner, a security guard. They're happy to see a black person in a low position. But when you try to rise above it and you become, more into like managerial positions or telling, effectively your white counterparts what to do, that becomes a problem. And it stopped a lot of people, for example, that made from having successful professional careers and from and certain businesses as well. So I think it's the fact that racism today can hold down your prospects of what of your bar of what you can achieve. Some people say, as black people we have to work twice as hard and free. To me that's true, but to me that's nonsense. We can't be in a mentality where we have to work 2-3 times as hard as someone else just because our skin color. Why should we have to work 3-4 times hard? So I really don't like that concept of I should have to work 3-4 times as hard as someone else because of my skin color is this color. So yeah, I think I've just answered your question.
Wow, that's quite, it's quite deep. It's quite pretty much deep. Now I also realized that your actual birth name is Matthew Babek. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And could you tell us about the making of your, maybe I will say, new name, Makonnen Sankofa? How does this name come about?
So my birth name was Matthew Babek. I changed my name to Makonnen Sankofa when I was 23. Yeah, I'm 30 now. I was 23 or 22 when I changed my name.
Wow.
So early 20s. The reason why I changed my name, I felt I needed a name that's become more African conscious. Myself, I'm a Rastafarian. I needed a name that could reflect my identity. I think, Matthew is a Bible, is a Christian name.
Yeah.
I'm not a Christian. Burbeck is, a family name. But I don't think it reflects my identity. So I changed my name to Makonnen. Now Makonnen is a name that was Haile Selassie, and Haile Selassie's father had family name before he was known as Haile Selassie. Before he was called Haile Selassie, he was known as Rastafari Makonnen, and his father is Ras Makonnen. Now, Haile Selassie, when he was the regent and etc., he was known as that name, Rastafari Makonnen, before he became the emperor of Ethiopia. When he became the emperor, he took on his baptismal name, his birth name of Emperor Haile Selassie. So, as my admiration for Haile Selassie and me being a Rastafari, I decided to then adopt the name Makonnen. Now, Sankofa, that is a Ghanaian name, and from the Akan people of Ghana, and it means the symbol of the bird, and the saying is to go back and fetch. Yeah, and you see a picture of a bird looking backwards. And to elaborate on that, it means to go back and know your roots, to go back to study and find your roots, so you can use what you know from the past and learn from the past to move forward in the future. And I think that kind of philosophy embodies me as a person in terms of Sankofa. I'm very conscious one, and I'm very much one seeking and learning from history and etc. And I think history is such an important thing. I mean, if you don't know what happened yesterday, even today is based off a lot of times things that happened yesterday. Yeah, and that could be yesterday, whether it's literally yesterday, or yesterday, whether it's 110 years ago, whatever. History is so important, and sometimes the problem we have as a people is because we just, we're told to forget about everything. It happened in the past, whatever it is, or history is not important. No other race of people think like this. For example, I remember a white person, a teacher, that lecturer that I had in university. And something that stood out to me was like, yeah, I might not have been around, this time or whatever, but I know everything. I know what was going on at that time. And he was always telling me the value of history, for example. And this is something, again, another internalization that I think a lot of our people have from slavery. And our parents tried to say, oh, you know what, if you need to forget about history or whatever. And again, and through colonization, but you know what, white people, they know about their history, and they hold on to their history. And Asian people, they do the same thing. For example, history is very, very important to them. But it's we as Black people, we're the ones that are always told, that our history is irrelevant, and to forget about things that have happened in the past.
Wow, I love your answer to that. And this want to make me to move into another sort of question. You said you were around 22 or 23 while you changed your name from Babak to Makonnen Sankofa. And I was curious to ask you, during that time that you were changing your name, what was the opinion of your parent then? Did you receive any sort of reputation or something like they criticizing you of wanting to change their family name to your own newly name made based on history and what you've read to Makonnen Sankofa?
Well, there wasn't any ill feelings. I was raised in my mum's family, not my father. My mum's family are my mum, her parents are from the Caribbean, from Jamaica. My dad is from Malawi, Southeast Africa.
Okay.
So most of my childhood, I was raised in a single parent household. I only really came in much contact with my father when I was little, like a 1-2-year-old. I might have seen him, but I don't really know what was going on there. But generally, until like my teens, about 14, 15, he was out of our lives. So when my mum found about it, I mean, I think she would obviously, I think any parent preferred if I kept my name, that name, but she wasn't like angry or anything like that. But my dad, I think when he came to find out about it, and he didn't really even say anything. It was just like kind of, he just took it. It is what it is. So I didn't really have any of my parents that were really mad or anything. I think my mum maybe would preferred if I kept my name the same, but it wasn't like she was angry with me. But at that time, I was I was living on my own. I've been very independent since I've been 19. I've pretty much always lived on my own since I left to go to university and have my own place, my apartment, and where I was at my stage of life and whatever. I was like, I want to do this regardless of, whatever people think, because this is me, this is my identity, and this is, I think, a name that I think reflects my identity.
Wow, well, that's quite deep, and I think I would say it's a strong decision to make. Okay, now Makonnen, could you tell us about your personal experience with racial discrimination in England?
Yeah, I've had racial discrimination in terms of whether it's in jobs, in work, in terms of employment, when I've gone, to go for certain promotion, or when I've gone for applying in certain positions that I know that I've not got because I'm black. And it's subtle in England, for example. Someone's not going to come up and blatantly say, "Oh, I'm not giving you this job because you're black." Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but it's subtle. So just because someone doesn't directly say that to your face does not mean that's not racism. Yeah, and this is the reason why. And this is the reason why a lot of white people will use that to say to you, "Well, how do you know that's racism?" Because I didn't say, I did it because your skin color, to kind of basically sidestep the fact that it is racism. So you don't have to say to someone's face, that you're racist, or you don't like that person's black. Yeah, but you can do that by, you can stop people from getting in certain positions or certain things. Yeah, and I know, for example, in certain jobs that I've done, where I will know that, if I was as good as what I did, that my white counterparts would have certainly got a lot further in terms of promotional positions. So it has held me back from, in terms of, well, I'm not gonna say held me back, it stopped me from progressing in certain areas, but I've always been successful in jobs and works that I do. So when I say hold me back, I mean I've always been able to be good, and in the places that I worked or whatever, when I've left, they always wanted me to stay or come back. So but in terms of work environments, I would say that I know a specific example was when I was working at a company, and I decided to, I was going for a managerial position. I decided to not pursue it in the end, but the amount of, I knew that if I been white and based on my level of expertise and how good I was at doing my job, that I would have been pushed forward into into that kind of role a lot more simpler. The person I employed to do that role, was a white lady that came in with little or no background in who didn't know the knowledge, and then came asking me for advice on how to do certain things. Yeah. Wow. So I know if I was a black person or a black woman, or even a black man or woman, you would not have got that position at that company if you was a black person and not a white lady with no experience. So these are some an example. I mean, in terms of renting, I've had accommodation. I've offered some. In one case, I remember I offered to pay 6 months rent up front, and it was just it was very dismissive straight away. When the person wanted to rent to me, and it was always one hurdle over another. Then it was an extra fee, this and that was coming, and yeah, I just got the impression that he just didn't want to rent. The person acting, the estate agent person that I was in contact with, he didn't want to rent to me. I've had examples like, even when I was coming back from Gambia to England in 2019. Now this is the fourth time I've been to the Gambia, but the third time when I was living in Gambia for 6 months, hence the book Life in Gambia, the Smiling Coast of Africa. And I was stopped at the airport, by the immigration officers, and I mentioned this in the book. I was stopped at the airport by the immigration officers stroke police people, that the immigration police, when you're coming back in, and they stopped me and searched me for drugs. I was the only black person walking past that part of the airport, and I just happened to be, and you get me, and they would just say, "Oh, it's a coincidence." They just happened to stop the only black person that's walking back there and search my briefcase for drugs. And it's the way they treated me. I was almost treated like I was a criminal, Wow. And this was to show me the fact is that I went from the Gambia to meeting, ministers and people that are, high up there, and footballers and head of this and head of these corporations and companies, and being treated. And being at the top end of the society, you've been treated almost like royalty in a way, and then they go back to England and they're treated like a second-class citizen. They're treated like you're scum. They're treated like you're worthless. So that's the kind of examples. I've had other examples in my experience that I remember that when I was at university days, I mean, and I've been called, not sorry, before I go into university days, I mean, I've been called a black belt masters before. I've seen had cars going past and called me, you know, a black cunt, and being with friends of mine are black and had names called out. I remember a time when I was at university and me and a friend was at this a venue that was going to, and they didn't want to let him in the venue. I know it was because he was black. They didn't want to let him in the venue. I came then, and the security guard was saying, "Oh, he's being aggressive, this, that, and the other." And he's a little guy, about my half. I say he was a small guy, and he's like, and I knew it wasn't. I knew what was going on. They didn't want to let him in because he was black. Now we'd been into the venue. There's a VIP section and there's a normal section of the venue. We'd been into, like, you know, the regular area of the venue, but you have to go out around the corner to go to the VIP. And when you go into the normal part of the section, you have to show them your identification to get in. So I left the normal part of the section to go to the VIP where I thought my friend was going to be, and he was denied entry of getting in there. They didn't want us to get in there, so I said, "Come, let's go." So we go back into the normal part of there. We've already showed the doorman and the ID, etc. He's asked us again to present the ID. Yeah, wow. When he's seen us clearly, a white person's walking in, no ask for ID, whatever they. People for ID. Do you understand? These are the kind of things. I remember another time I went to a venue. It was me and my friend, and, you know, it was with two friends, two women. These were two white women, and it's like they kind of broke us up from them, and they let the two women go in, two white women, and then it was us. They basically separated out, and then even one of the security guards was being too quite aggressive to one of my friends. So these are just, you know, some examples, but there's more, man. Living in England is a constant thing. And I just want to add another example, by the way, is that I remember one time also getting on a coach, and you know what, you have to buy a ticket. You buy a ticket to get on a coach, and I was going to work, and the website was down, and I couldn't buy a ticket, and then the person driving the vehicle was they're meant to be able to sell you a ticket, yeah. But he was like, you know, the machine's down, and he couldn't sell me a ticket. The coach driver, so he sent me to this place down the road. The system was down, so I then got on the coach. I was like, well, I can't. The website is not working online. You don't have your system's not working. The system down the road isn't working. You've got to let me on here because it's not my fault. Your systems are not working. So I got on the coach, and then he stopped the coach, and he says that, you know, if you don't get off or whatever, I'm going to call the police. He called the police and said that they would arrest me and this, that, and the other. And I knew those kind of situations. What happened in those situations there? A policeman will get on the car, will get in the coach, will arrest you, and the coach driver will say, you know what, there's that bad person there. You know, he hasn't bought a ticket and he's got on the coach, and then the police will arrest you, and then they will look for you to do something, yeah, that provokes that kind of action for them to give you, yeah, a proper reason to arrest you.
Wow, that's quite an experience. Now, your answer to that question would want me to move into a more similar question. I'd love to ask you, why do you think people are racist, or why do people feel racist towards certain people, color, tribe, or ethnics? What are the factors, in your opinion, that you think promote racism in an environment?
I think there's various different things. There's different levels. There's different kinds of racism. You have personal racism and you have institutional racism. So someone might just be personally racist because they don't like the skin color of you when you look or whatever. But then institutional racism is which stops you from, you know, what, getting into certain positions, like I mentioned, like job or certain, you know, positions of power, etc. So there's many different reasons, depending on example. I mean, some of it could be, I think for some people, it could be greed, it could be power, it could be jealousy. These are some of the reasons. But I think what we're talking about, and let's call it what it is, that generally a lot of racism is thrown up against us as Black people of African heritage. And what we're talking about a lot, is racism. So because I don't know, yeah, anywhere where, you know, Black people have gone and have imposed, people of African heritage have gone and conquered people's land and then imposed apartheid and laws in place, yeah, that stops the native people from having the same rights as, you know, the people that have moved to that country. I don't know anywhere where Black people have enslaved people. I don't know anywhere where in Africa where, you know, people of other races come and black people are so, you know, hostile to people of other races. So I think that, I don't think it's, when we say we, I think it's a thing, I think other races, particularly white people who've done it the most, but also, you know, other races of people have an issue with black people. And I think this is what it is. And I don't know why. You'd have to ask those people why they hate us so much. But when I see, for example, when I look at the neutrality, and I don't want to say this goes beyond just white people, but I'm going to say this now because this is what a lot of what we've been talking about. A lot of the racism that has been done on black people has been done predominantly by well, to the levels that it's been done on, has been done the worst by white people. Yeah, and I'm not saying not every single white person, because it's good and bad of every race. I understand. Sure. Yeah, but I'm talking about, you know, but I'm not going to say, you know, not all every time I speak, but when I'm talking about, you know, racism, for example, this is what I've said to you. And it's not just, you know, slavery, because this is something that people often try to use to kind of, you know, trip up black people and say that, oh, you know what, you lot are just talking about slavery and that's in the past, but forget over it. A lot of what I mentioned, for example, is racism that's still going on to this day. Yeah, in terms of the way that black people are treated. So we're not talking about, you know, just something that happened, you know, 400 or 500 years ago. Because if slavery happened, yeah, and you know what, after slavery, you know what, black people were treated normally and equal, whatever, we would look at slavery and be like, you know what, it was horrific that happened, but that, you know, that was something that happened in that generation, that past. But the fact is, these kind of racism has continued on ever since then. We just continued on, like I mentioned, in Jim Crow law, yeah, has continued on in, you know what, the way that black people were treated in this country, from, you know, from when they went from, you know, the migration of the Windrush, like my grandparents, until this day. You know what, this continued on in, you know, the minds of Africa and the continent, and why Africa is in the way it is today, and the colonization. So what I'm saying is, when you have like people that, for no reason, look at, you know, the incident that happened in Buffalo, and you know, the white supremacists that all of a sudden that went into the school and started, you know, randomly kill. I think it was a supermarket, wasn't it? And he started randomly killing black people in the supermarket. And you know what, the incidents years ago in Carolina, where you had another white person that went into a church and just started randomly killing black people. Despite everything that has been done to black people, you never see black people. You never see, oh yeah, black people all of a sudden went into a supermarket and decided that he's just going to kill some random people because they're white. But so what I'm trying to say is that white people have got a problem with black people, and they've got a racist, and they need to basically. So I can't answer why there's so much wickedness within it and so much hatred. Just because, how can you hate someone, look at someone just because of the color of their skin, and want to do bad things to someone just because of someone has a different skin color from you? And now going beyond just, you know, white people, but you also have, like, say, other races of people, like, see, Asian people. I know people that are married Asian people, or no, sorry, that have had relationships with Asian people, black, and they've been, the Asian person has disowned that Asian person because they've got a black partner, yeah? And these are the things, for example, Chinese, I know people that have been in relationship with, well, Asian, I mean, like more like Indian now, yeah, or Pakistani. But when you have, because you have then Chinese people as well. But even like how, you know, the Chinese look at African people, it's in an inferior way. And I don't know what it is, but it's like we as black people, we are not the ones that are like going out there in the world and, you know, doing all these things. I think racism has been done by all groups of people, Arabic people, you know, you have the Arabic slave trade and the way Arabic people treat Africans, by Asian people, you know, by white people, but it's been done the worst by white people against black people in general. But I think I don't get it. It's crazy, and I think there's, you know, something that's just, you know, built in white people, where they just have this barbaric nature. But you know, they do bad things to each other as well. So we can't just say it's always just on black people. It's just, you know, because I've even witnessed it myself. Other white people have treated and talked to white people like this, and I've been like, it's horrible. So it's But I think I think I've pretty much covered what you.
Yeah, I love your answer to that. And in my own opinion, I would also love to add this to my own side, because I know that, not, like you said, not all white have been racist towards the black. And again, I'd also love to say that most black hate themselves. Like, we've seen opinion, we've seen cases. And let me just say that it has to do with the matter of the human heart. Like, the human conscience, the human psychology, the human mind, your level of education, the level of exposure. Because we've had most instances and most cases whereby the Black even kill themselves. It happens very well here in Nigeria. Recently, we have a group of people, some people calling themselves Islamic people, killing a particular young lady just for blasphemy of the Prophet Muhammad. And recently, not far from my state here, a particular church was attacked by some unknown gunmen, and they just went there and killed the worshippers without having anything, without any cause of probably they've committed an offense or a crime. They just walk in there and kill people like that. So I think, such kind of people, the sort of art that they have towards killing another person is a sort of art, an hatred art, jealousy in the mind. And, all this sort of issue affected the human psyche is a sort of thing that I would love to say that makes most people to be racist. And you can also see it manifesting itself from the white to the Black, and from the Black to the Black, or the white to the white, etc. I just have to say that it depends on the matter and the conscience, the state of the person's heart.
Well, I think I just want to come back now and say that, a lot of like what you mentioned, for example, that I think again, that's talking more religious in terms of that, why that particular incident happened. And in general, unfortunately, religion has that's going to take it into another conversation now. But religion and has whether Christianity or Islam, but it has bad things have been done and people have been killed in the name of religion. So I think that's taking it onto that's a kind of a different kind of area or example, but a different motivation than just necessarily just the racism, because then people just doing it because of not necessarily I'm doing it because I'm racist, but I'm just doing it because I'm in this religion, I believe this is part of my religion, or because of but then still those kind of reasons could be power, greed, or whatever. But a lot of it will be like, because of my faith and you're not in my faith or whatever. Not that it's justifiable, but I think that wherever you look at the world, for example, wherever European, wherever white people have gone, there's been a problem and they've caused destruction. Like whether it is in Australia and the Aborigine people and what they've done to the Aborigine people, not just with African people, Black people, because we're not just got this be on the bottom of Black people, but look at Asia, the colonization of Asia. Look at what China, the colonization of China and Japan. So this you have Africa, like the continent that's been colonized, and places like South Africa where apartheid was imposed. When you come, to their supposedly country, even though it's not their country, Britain, the way that you're treated, America, so I think anywhere white people have gone around the world, they have caused, they have racially oppressed people. And again, not every single white people, but I'm saying a high proportion of those.
Oh, thank you so much, Makonnen Sankofa, for talking about racism and for shedding more light on your book, The Rise of Rastafari and Life in Gambia. It's a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome.